Drought was a problem in 2021, and it may be compounded in 2022. Today's discussion revolves around the very real consequences of back-to-back drought years and the impacts they will have on producers and consumers alike. Welcome to Hashknife Hangouts. I'm Calen. The other man is my co-host and father, Brandon. If you haven't already, please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel. While you're at it, check out our Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and Rumble pages, all below at the handles. For those returning, thank you for your return. We appreciate you. Now, today, we discuss the continuing drought that has been plaguing the Western United States. We had this discussion last year when I was in San Antonio for a few months, and we're going to continue it again this year. It's you could say a part two. But what we're going to do is I got three things I really want to share, and this can be a longer monologue to start off. So please hang in there with me. First, we shared our personal struggles from the drought last year. Just like I said, this ongoing issue, though, is spreading further across the United States than it did last year. There were quite a few states that were impacted, but this year it seems to be more and more states and regions that are feeling the struggle. However, unlike last year, like many in our region, they were unable to travel east and obtain hay to feed our animals. We were able to go to places like Nebraska and get some hay. It was costly, but it worked. This year, we may be unable to do that due to the weather and circumstances, and that's not only for us, but that's for others as well. For us this year seems to be better than last, but it's not as common sentiment across the egg producers throughout our United States. Second, mid-year cattle reports state that the cattle inventory is down more than 2%, which equates to about 750,000 head this year. That's 750,000 animals, folks. Already, this predicts a decrease of 5% in 2023. So take that and add another 3% to what we're feeling this year. So I would guess rough estimates, roughly 2 million head for 2023. The industry, we see cycles like this, but it's still concerning. Reports in the Southern Plains state pastures and ranges have been rated as poor or very poor, which are increasing nearly double from 18% of the land to 34%, going from regular decent grazing to poor, very poor. Like I said, 18% used to be, and now it's currently in 2022, 34% is in that poor or very poor category. This directly related to some of the rapid liquidation sales that have recently been seen in Texas. And because of this, prices for cattle are also dropping. Cull animals have increased to about 125%, with animals selling for pennies on the dollar. We complain every year for the prices and everything, and this is simply compounding the issue. A recent example is the July 9th sale near Dallas, Texas. That sale, there was an auction that sold a total of 3,494 head of livestock, nearly 3,500 livestock total. This included horses, cows, sheep, and goats from over 500 separate sellers. That means a lot of people are suffering and they can't do it. They have to cut their losses and move on. So of those 3,494 head, 2,763 or 79% of that entire livestock quota or conglomerate or cattle. 79%. That's crazy. 935% or 34% of them being cows and bulls were head classified as breeding stock. So a third of all those sold were breeding stock. Reporters state that the influx of the livestock was likely caused by several factors, those being four things. One, the drought conditions, the things we're going to talk about today. Two, the cost of feed and fertilizer inputs. Those are other issues that we've discussed previously, but we can discuss today. Three, a long stretch between sales due to the holiday. Understand, they simply broke off the regular sale because of the 4th of July weekend on that particular circumstance. I'm talking about the July 9 sale. So they 5 days prior to the July 4 sale, they just didn't do it because of the United States holiday. Understandable. Number four, though, steady sale prices. Currently, prices aren't great, but they're decent, and they've been decent for a little bit for cattle producers. So people took advantage of it. Drought, feed and fertilizer costs, long stretch with the holiday, and 4, steady sale prices all led to that large sale that I am referring to near Dallas on July 9th. Now, call me a skeptic, but I think it's more than sale prices in a long holiday stretch, but you never know. Third, and my final big point to put across here on this early monologue, the question is that what is the impact of these conditions and sales on the consumer? Well, I don't think it's good. First, it helps businesses justify plant-based proteins. That's my number one. It continues to help packers increase the prices on consumers while taking advantage of liquidation sales to get animals for pennies on the dollar. That's number 2. And finally, the number 3 point that I want to get across is it spells a future with less and less meat consumption for the beef industry. If this cycle continues, or if this cycle breaks the norm, meaning instead of doing the ups and downs like we normally do, but it just continues to go down, this has a potential to be the beginning of the end where beef slowly dwindles away. I have 3 things to take away from all of this. So I've been all sorts of 3s today. What is it that, or sorry, what is the way, or what are the various ways we move forward from this? First, I think it's us. We will continue to watch our animals, monitor the ground on which we operate. We never push the ground further than it can handle, because otherwise we are setting our future selves up for failure. We are caretakers of the animals and land alike. Additionally, we are continuing to reevaluate how we produce beef and the ranch for success. That's for us personally at the Hashknife Ranch. I guarantee you, though, there's a lot of ranches that are doing the same thing. Over time, this may look more like less mass production and more personal, intimate sales for individuals through the direct sales, which we've been starting to dabble into. Second, our expectations of our representatives. Organizations and politics alike are suspiciously silent these days. The NCBA, beef councils, and of all people who really should support us, senators and our current representative in Montana have stayed silent throughout this entire process. And this is where I get really emotional and really upset. We struggled last year to get some traction in Congress with meat packers. We had our 5 minutes of fame, but when it came through, following through with real action, nothing happened. And we've talked about this before. You can see all sorts of other Hangout episodes where we stood here for an hour or sat here for an hour and discussed it. We are seeing more of the same and watching multi-generation farms and ranches fold week after week, month after month, year after year. And it really hurts. The question slowly starts to become, if this continues, when will it become us? These people who are supposed to represent us and the industry, not just us, but also the industry, are failing us. It's time they start to hear about it. And I don't know if it's through the ballot box. I don't know if it's through social media. I don't know if it's through things like this YouTube channel, but they need to start hearing about it. And finally, my number 3 point. Number 3, not number 3. Influence. What can it do? In my opinion, the greatest influence to solve the issues we are seeing is the consumer. The people who don't produce, the people who aren't producing this video, it's the people who are listening to us, watching us, and eating the very meat in which we produce. To ranchers, yeah, we can stay afloat. There needs to be more direct sales. That might help. The government won't do anything to fix the monopoly issues with regards to packers. And even if it did, it is such a massive organization, it may be too late to get this thing done in time. Meaning the government is so large and it's such a large boat that it would take too long to move the boat in the correct direction, if that helps people understand. Organizations can assist, but as I stated before, those that are representing us right now have failed to do their job, despite requiring us to pay them things like $1 a head at sales and the do-gooders providing charitable donations to the cause. All that money has done is line the pockets of a lot of corrupt people and not help those who it needs to help. Finally, the ranchers can only do what we are now. Speak out and share facts as best as possible to provide insight to the realities of the situation. And that's where we find ourselves today. So with that, I'm losing my voice because I'm not drinking enough water. I will finally turn it over to Dad.
A lot there.
Yeah.
it's a lot of the same we've been saying, but what did I tell you in a
Nothing will
previous
change.
episode?
You already said that.
Nothing will
Nothing will
change.
change.
Nothing will change. Um, they always do this, make a lot of noise, and then promptly walk away. So, um, the thing that's really problematic is we're not just talking about, you know, family ranches and farms that'll fold. Those are not in a faraway place. Those are right here, everywhere around us. I was
And
visiting.
here's where I'll jump in real quick. That's the hard thing for me. Because for us it is personal. It is right here. It is our backyard. Me, it's metaphorically my backyard, but it'll be my backyard one day in about 18 months. There's a lot of people though where I currently live where it's just not the case. Louisville, Kentucky, Nashville, Tennessee, New York, New York, Chicago, Illinois, LA, California. Start throwing out big, even Austin, Texas. They've got a lot of livestock and a lot of agriculture around them, but really to them, their backyard is still streets and pavement.
Right.
And so that's where it does hurt, is because there's a lot of us out there, start going to places like Omaha, Nebraska, where it's a big city, but there's still very much a close knit community around that.
Right.
You go to Rapid City, South Dakota, you go to Billings, Montana, you go to outskirts, I'll say outskirts of Seattle, Washington, Boise, Idaho. Those places, yes, it is their backyard, but it's becoming very apparent and very disheartening that less and less of our backyard is the producer. And I think that's where the disconnect is coming in, and that's why it's driven us to where we are now with social media and YouTube.
It has. I mean, our whole idea, when we started this, was to educate people, and we are not the end all of agricultural information. I mean, other
Yeah.
people have ranches and they run them differently because of what we've talked about, our resources, your grass,
Right.
your water, whatnot. Now we are, after a couple of years now, we are running our ground at the maximum. So we've got to get some moisture. That's the first thing, that really nobody can control unless you're in North Dakota and you're seeding clouds in Montana and you're causing it to rain there. And they're back to their old tricks again. I just saw an article
But they
about that.
haven't done that in like several decades, right?
No, they're doing it again. They started
They're
again.
doing it again.
Yes, I read an article recently that they were doing that. I don't know that they're doing it into Montana, but they're certainly doing it into western North Dakota.
Damn it, North Dakota, you Pollux.
Yeah,
That's our running joke in Montana, is all the polls. But man, you guys are killing me right now.
North Dakotans. Yeah. So yesterday, day before, I was visiting with a guy. Hadn't seen him in a long time, long time. And everybody's busy. They're doing stuff. They're trying to keep their places afloat, and they're scratching out a living. And I'm talking to him. I hadn't seen him in, I'll bet you, 20 years. And which is sad because he's 20 miles away. You just don't, we just tend not to go that direction so much. And he was saying I was asking about some family members and how things were going for him. And he's okay. They don't have any cattle. They're leasing, they got yearlings they're running for somebody else. Yeah. So, which maybe he's hoping they can make some money on yearlings, taking some of these feeders and putting some weight on them, making them fat cattle, and then selling them to a feedlot. But his sister and brother-in-law, they just sold their ranch because they can't make it. So that's close. That's very close to home. And people don't realize that they think, when we talk about families, folding the tent stakes up and stopping a multi-generational business that feeds people, that's out there somewhere. That's happening. No, it's happening right in everybody's backyard. You were talking about 3,500 head of cattle coming in, and that's really not a lot. When you go into like the Billings Livestock or the public auction yards, one of the two auction yards in Billings, there's sale days that they've got, 7,000-8,000 head of cattle running through there, depending on the time of year. This time of year, that's a lot of cattle though. And when you break that down, you're talking that many people, everybody's bringing in 5 or 6 animals on average.
Right. Well, and
So
I'll throw the numbers out there again for context. It was 3,500 head total, with about 2,800 being cattle specifically.
right,
So 79% of
right.
all livestock were cattle. And then keep in mind, of the cattle that were sold, 1/3 were cows and bulls of breeding stock.
Right.
So it's not like people, you don't just sell your breeding stock unless it's for
Right.
an optimal reason, or you've
Or
got
or you're a
you've got
seed
20.
stock supplier. That's what you do.
Right. That's what I was gonna say. Is
Right.
you got 50 to 100 bulls lined up, or premium heifers lined up
Right.
for sale. That's different. This is breeding stock that's probably been proven for a couple of years, and guys and gals can just not afford it, and so now they're selling it because they're like, it's the only option I got.
Well,
And the other thing too is it's not just the numbers, but it's the numbers this time of year.
right.
Normally that's fall or very early spring.
Right.
This is in the middle of summer. And so
Well,
people are saying immediately, I got to cut my losses and now, otherwise it's going to be worse.
and that's my point is, when you got that many people that are taking a half a dozen animals in,
Yeah.
they're slowly whittling away at their herd. They're taking what was a decent probably herd, and especially like you talk about these breeder type cattle, and you're selling them off. Now what you're doing is you're whittling down what used to be a cull was a cull. Now you're culling stuff that would never have been culled before, because you can't afford to keep it. You can't feed it. And the one thing that
And
people may
well, before
miss.
you go further, to explain to people, a regular cull is, hey, this is an undesirable cow or bull, or they're just not producing like they used to
They're aged
produce.
out.
So at
Yeah.
that particular point in the year, as always, you will take a certain section, roughly 5 to 10%, depending on how big your operation is, and you'll sell them and say, okay, it's better to sell them now than to continue the process and potentially lose money keeping them around. Versus now you're going past that, and it's more than just your 5 to 10%, but it's closer to 25, 30% of your herd, because you can't afford the operation costs to maintain the herd size. So you now have to drastically reduce herd size. It's like saying your company of 100 employees, you now have to cut down to 60 because you can't afford to pay all the benefits and the salaries of those other 40. It's that type of thing.
Well, and you're having a gap there, and the gap is you've got all of these cattle coming in, yet you're short 750,000 head.
Mhm.
So that tells you where everybody's at. They've already been in this decline with their own herds, and we've done it ourselves. We're trying to hang on. This year's much like last year. And one of the things that's not factored in to hay prices is, and fertilizer prices, is our fossil fuel costs. And it takes a lot of diesel and gasoline to put up hay or make fertilizer. Fertilizer is a product of our gas and oil industry. And so
Well,
when you're doing that and those costs are high, you're not just having one item that's high. Now you're having
yeah.
multiple items that are high for a single commodity. And that's a kiss of death. I mean, you can't continue to do that year after year. And we're in the same spot ourselves. Our grass is a little better this year, but it's quickly being eaten by grasshoppers like it was last year, only a little bit later in the year. And it's brutal out there right now.
And that the thing that you just said brought up two really important points that I think need to be brought across. I'll start with the inventory, right? We're down 2% this year from we were last year. Again, 750,000 head of cattle for beef production. They're already predicting for next year, 2023, it'll be a decrease of 5%. Now, the real question is that a decrease of 5% from this year, or from, what the standard is? Understanding the article I read, I think it's 5% from the standard, which hurts because that's
Sounds like
3%
it.
further.
Right.
And that is a big
But it's
issue.
not an additional 3% or 5%,
Right. Right.
yeah, but
Now,
it's still a decrease.
oh, it's, yeah, well, yeah, and especially with how much beef is produced in the United States, that's
Yeah.
a huge increase because, again, I think I talked about this before. I don't remember if it was a Hangouts or if it was a smaller episode, but I heard somewhere recently that the United States holds uh 18 roughly percent of all cattle in in the world, but we produce closer to 33% of the world's beef. So we are so efficient and so good at what we do in the United States of producing beef that we can double what anybody else can do, which is crazy. But that's the first thing that I wanted to bring across is how much of an influence, and we've talked about this before, is the plant-based protein or the alternate meats or the impossible burger, how much of that is impacting this. And
Petri
then
dish food.
yeah, and the second part is the the fertilizer that you brought up, the fossil fuels that are used, and really what I'm kind of posing here, with putting both of these subjects together, or these two argumentative points, is it's fossil fuels and the reduction of beef, all relating towards modern day politics. There's a lot of
Hmm.
United States politics. I don't know. We do have a decent following in the United Kingdom, New Zealand, and India. Obviously, we're an American based company, we're an American based YouTube channel, but we do have a decent following from those three other nations. I'm curious, compared to those other nations, because I don't live there and I don't really follow those politics, but our politics in the United States have focused so much on anti beef because of greenhouse gases and so on and so forth, and the plant based proteins, because it's furthered, I guess, justified the argument in anti-beef stance. It's very curious to me to see that the fossil fuels, the political decisions that have been made over the past year to 18 months that have resulted in increased gas prices and petroleum products, coupled with the anti-beef stance, have resulted in much of this standpoint. And it's just, again, we make it very clear across spectrum of time on this channel. We try to stay anti-political, but this is one of those times where the politics have influenced us, so we have to state what our political stance is, and it's very much pro beef and low fuel costs, fossil fuel costs at any freaking
Well,
cost,
not
because this is the real impacts, is you're
right.
forcing farms and ranches to fold because they can no longer support themselves.
With a decrease in the amount of available food.
Right.
Figure that out. That's what's going to happen now. And I don't see a lot happening until people are hungry. And
Yeah.
I know that sounds like that's futuristic, but you know what? It's happened in other places on the planet. It just hasn't happened here.
Well, and the other thing too is I saw another thing today, and it drives me crazy. Now, based off of me being the guy that mostly puts together these notes and film preparations for all of our episodes when it comes to these Zoom sessions, I I have a lot of social media stuff because it tends to be, what's trending tends to catch people's eye. So I try to make our conversations focus towards that. Something I saw today, again, because I follow so many ag things, somebody put in there, they showed an example of a follower or a subscriber to it was like a Facebook page or a YouTube channel, saying, I don't understand why these farmers in Indiana are complaining about their soybeans or whatever, when they can just simply go to the supermarket and
Don't
get
say
their
it. Oh,
stuff. And I'm like,
that's what I'm
a lot of
saying.
people, but a lot of people bring up the good point, and it's a very valid point. This is such a minority. I don't understand why you guys continue to blast this argument. It's such a minority. There's only like 1 or 2% of people that think that way, that the food in the supermarket comes from the supermarket. It doesn't
How do
come
you know
from
that?
farmers and ranchers. Okay, let's assume that's true. I don't think it's true. I think it's a higher percentage than that. But let's assume that's true. Okay, but the problem is that 1 or 2% still exists. That 1 or 2% should never exist. They should know where their food comes from and not just think that it comes from the supermarket on a regular basis. Like, where does that thinking come from that makes
Right.
them understand that that's where the basis of all their food comes from?
Well, and here's the thing. That's somebody who's vocal about their ignorance. They're not stupid. They're just ignorant about,
Yeah.
what's going on, right? I mean, there's a big difference there. How many people live in urban America? I mean, truly urban. big cities.
Hold on. I got Uncle Google coming up, so let's stand by.
My point is, that's a pretty high number because so many people are disconnected to what really feeds them. They think it is. I mean, because it's available in a store or a supermarket. If that's not there, what do they do? Where do they think that comes from? How does it get there? And I'll bet you most of them can't tell you.
Right.
And I'll bet you it's a higher than average number. They may have, well, I guess it comes from farms, and they'll say they don't even know what a ranch is. They'll say farms because that's what, most people equate agriculture to.
Yeah.
But they have no idea that break, how it magically appears into a truck, and the truck is delivered if they put that together.
Now, because Uncle Google is so rapid in his answer, currently in 2010 census.
Disclaimer: be careful.
Yeah. Uncle Google. It's google.com, folks. United States in 2010, so about 12 years ago, was 308.8 million roughly personnel in the United States. 249.23-ish lived in the urban area. I just did a quick thing. It was just all I did was 250 divided by 308, and it was 81% or so. Going a little further, it says estimated 83%, a little dialed in better. The United States population lives in the urban area. I would guess most of the world is in a very similar circumstance. So you're looking at 4 out of 5 people live in an urban environment.
Mhm.
So only 1 out of 5 is in a rural environment. Now, keep in mind, just because 1 out of 5 lives in a rural environment doesn't mean 1 out of 5 is producing.
Right. I was just going to say, you've got to break that further down, because how much percent of our population is in agriculture?
Mm-hmm.
Less than 2%.
Mm-hmm.
So that is a very, very low number that is not inclusive of all of the numbers in a rural area, because there's plenty of people living in a rural area that maybe have jobs that support agriculture, or they have jobs that are support in an urban area.
Right.
So, I mean, those numbers they get very thin very quickly. And so the awareness is one thing. If you can't afford the fuel to put hay up to where you can afford to put it into a cow to produce feed at our level, which we're very dependent on, how many people can afford to buy that animal, even in an urban area, because of the cost of fuel for them to get back and forth to work?
Right.
So it breaks down there as well as it does here. So again, yeah, you're right. I'm glad you said that we try not to bring politics into this, but there are some issues that you cannot avoid talking about. We're not going to stick our heads in the sand or say, oh, we're never going to violate that. We're not telling you what our opinion is. We're telling you how it affects us.
Right. Well, and here's where I'll move on to the second part, which I think is important too. We started to kind of go down this road, veered more towards the policies and stuff like that. But it was my second point that I brought up as well. The expectations of our representatives, and that's not just political representatives, but it's also organizations and associations. The NCBA, National Cattlemen's Beef Association. We've talked about them many times across this channel. There's multiple beef councils. There's the Wyoming Beef Council. There's the Montana Beef Council. There's the North Dakota. Like each state typically has its own council. There's other charity organizations, so on and so forth. And like I brought up, we when we sell a cow, for example, we just had a video today is the 1st of August. We're filming this. It'll come out on, let me look, the 7th of August, this particular episode. On the 1st, we had a video come out talking about a finished beef animal. It was a heifer. Her name was Cankles. She was produced by a local customer. And
well, She was purchased. We produced her. She was purchased and she was processed by a local
You're right.
uh,
Yeah. We produced
butcher
her.
shop.
We sent her to a good butcher that we enjoy. We've worked really well with, and it happens to work out. Consumed and purchased by, there you go, a customer. Which, by the way, they said it was great. So if anybody's looking for beef, Hashknife Ranch LLC. But for that beef sale, we had to pay $1 per head to the NCBA to help with the promotion of beef in general. Completely understand why we do that. We support that. If it was voluntary, it's a mandatory thing. Otherwise, you get fined more than the animal would be worth. Let's have that noted. And that particular organization has done absolutely nothing to help us throughout this whole issue that we've been seeing over the last few years. And this is not just a couple of years issue. This has been a multi-generational issue, but it's been expanded and extrapolated more so over the last couple of years than probably in a long time. The people who stood up in front of Congress and testified and explained things and said, this is why we're having the issues we're having, is because there's 4 meat packers that have conglomerated and they've colluded and they're working separately, but also at the same time together to drive down producer numbers while drastically increasing consumer prices and getting a 500% increase in revenue for themselves. We're not people from the NCBA. It was fellow ranchers, and it was people on local boards and councils that came together and went all the way to Washington on their own dime and on their own money to make this message go through. It wasn't the NCBA, it wasn't the beef councils, and our senators and our representatives did jack to help us out. And they've done nothing. They have done nothing since those particular investigations and hearings. And it's very disappointing because this is the other part of the politics is we expect those associations, we expect those councils, and we expect the people who represent us politically day in and day out in Washington, D.C. to do something about it. And they have failed to do that. And that's the part that really upsets me is the people that we put money towards, the people that we vote for, and the people that we are supposed to trust have let us down day in and day out. And they're watching our industry. And frankly, those senators and representatives from Montana, Wyoming, and the Dakotas are watching their people slowly die away because of it.
And tisk tisk, isn't it too bad?
Yeah.
I'm so jaded to when I think they're actually going to help people. And you're right, the NCBA and others like them who are more lobbyist, I think, they'll stand up and make a statement and they'll give some numbers, but I don't know. I think the folks that show up, as you said, that are actually in the agriculture themselves, they're doing the work. That is passion and emotion. But passion and emotion has no weight.
Well, and I'll tell you what, it's not emotion in a bad sense whatsoever.
No, not at all. I don't mean it that way.
The men who went to Congress last year in 2021 and they presided, they put their necks out on the line in front of Congress and in front of millions of people. They provided their passion and they provided emotion, and they did also all of that with grace, dignity, and facts. The best thing that I could have ever asked for anybody to represent our industry was to do so with facts and to make sure that people understood so that they didn't think we were coming over the top.
Right.
Those men that did that, man, they nailed it. They did a great job. There was a man, I don't remember his name right now, but he had a mustache, glasses, he's a little heavier set, and he walked in there with absolute class and he nailed it. And he was able to get Congress to understand the extreme situation in which we are today. And despite that, they still did nothing. And
Here's part of
that's
the
where
problem.
it hurts.
Here's part of the problem. Some of the policies that have been done have put us in this position. They're the very people that have done that.
Yeah.
And then they look around and say, well, we don't know what's wrong. You caused this because you're willing to take money from certain groups and position us so we're fighting each other, and yet you still get to get elected. You still get to have some income coming in. I am so done with politicians. I just can't stand them.
Well, and
Um,
you know what's
and,
also
and and
very
that's not too bad, because I think there's probably some good people that are trying to do something, but you don't know who they are
I
necessarily.
mean,
You know,
there's only 535 members of Congress. When you only
right?
have 5 of them doing something, that's nothing,
Exactly.
you know.
Right.
Uh
Drowned out.
the other thing too that's actually saddening is, and I can't believe I'm saying this because our politics don't align whatsoever, but one of the people who has actually teamed up with more conservative people from like South Dakota, Iowa, Kansas to actually put forth bills to protect and to assist farmers and ranchers has been a vegan who has a D behind his name and is from New Jersey. And his name of all people is Cory Booker. And it's crazy because he has been more of a proponent of farmers and ranchers than people who I tend to feel more aligned to politically. And it almost kind of hurts me to say that. Like,
Well, but even still, be careful who is helping you
yeah,
or
no, I
seeming to
agree.
help you, right?
Because he is now. Here's the other flip side. He is a big proponent of plant-based protein,
There you go. He's working his
and
way in there.
and again, how much everybody who's ever followed this channel and understands my stance on plant-based protein, how much I freaking hate plant-based protein because of the nutritional, in my opinion, inadequacies of plant-based protein and the concerns for processed food.
Well, have you ever eaten any of that garbage?
No, but one of these days I'm gonna get you to do it with. Actually, it might be this Christmas when I'm home for a few weeks. I might get a home grown steak and a plant-based protein steak, and we're gonna cook them next to each other, and we're gonna season them, do everything the exact same, and we're gonna film it. And I'm not too excited because Greg, a guest earlier this year, said he was not excited, and for health reasons, he decided to try it, and he was like, "No, I'm never doing that nonsense again." But one of these days, we're gonna freaking try it.
And that's somebody who's very open-minded and not necessarily, and he's not, I mean, look, face it, we're carnivores.
Yeah, we're
Our existence is
I've
carnivoristic. I mean,
yeah.
and he is a very open-minded guy. And if he does that, it kind of sets the stage for me. It's like, I'm not gonna like this. I kind of thought that anyway, but we'll find out. Here's one thing I had one time: tofu jerky.
Yeah,
And
that
that was
was
the nastiest stuff. I could not eat it.
I'll I'll have tofu. Um, Somebody from my past taught me how to make pho one time, and pho is delicious. And so on occasion I will make that. And in the pho there's tofu. And if anybody's unfamiliar with pho, it's more of like a more brothy, more stuff involved like beef and chives and sprouts, all sorts of stuff that you throw into with ramen. Okay. It's a more hearty version of ramen is how I'd probably
Okay.
describe it.
So
Tofu goes
hard,
in there.
so it's ramen for somebody who's just recently out of college and now working and can afford to put stuff in it.
Yeah, there you go. I
Okay.
like it.
All right.
um, I'll have tofu with that, but I had that same tofu jerky with you, and I swallowed it because it came from a family friend. If the family friend had not given it to me, I would have spit that stuff. God, it was bad.
It was
It
bad. It was
was
bad.
the best part too was it was a couple, and the husband said, "Yeah, it's not that great. I'll admit it." I'm like, "Why did you give it to us?" Come on, Larry.
He might have been trying to get rid of it.
Oh
Uh,
gosh, darn. Okay, anyway, moving on though. Something I want to talk about is protein in general, and that is so I recently, um, and it was on social media. It's on. Okay, I'll self admit here is TikTok. It's coming from a source that it appeared to be reliable. Appeared, so I don't know, but it was a nutritionist, a professional nutritionist, talking about protein and stuff like that. Um, it's interesting because today we talk about and keep in mind this was also with weightlifting too, so it was kind of tandem weightlifting and nutrition. It talks about how a lot of weightlifters will do, if they're having a lot of protein, they'll do like a gram or a gram, like 1.2 grams of protein per pound of body weight, right? So
okay.
if I'm 100 pounds, I should be having 120 grams of protein to help build muscle, right? A lot of people when they're counting their macronutrients, which is what I do, that's the best diet that's worked for me. It's not, the fad diet. It's, just checking protein, fats, and carbs. That's really what I do. And then I couple that with calories for the day.
Mm.
That tends to work for me. May not work for everybody, but there's a lot of people that have found that works for them as well. It's flexible in the diet and all that. But the real big thing of those three things, the protein, fats, and carbs, is that people always make sure that they hit their protein, because their protein is important for muscle growth, especially if you're active and stuff like that. And a lot of people, such as myself, have a calculation that will roughly equate to 0.8 grams of protein per body weight. So I'm 180 pounds, right? So I should be having somewhere around, 140, 150 grams of protein ish a day to kind of equate to that. This nutritionist that I saw, and it was very interesting how she explained it, because she explained it very much like that. Conventional ways since the 60s, 70s, 80s have been, this amount of protein if you're going to do like body work and stuff like that, like
Body
Arnold
build.
Schwarzenegger,
Yeah.
Ronnie Coleman, some of those big names, right? And she goes, do you know how many grams of protein were provided to the average World War II soldier on the United States? And I thought about that. I was like, me being the history guy, it's interesting that she asked that, because I know the physical state in which a lot of these soldiers were when they entered. It was, pardon my French, so to speak, folks, but it was a shit show. And when they first entered the war, going into Africa, because it started Africa, then into Italy, and then we did D-Day and went across Europe. Going into Africa, if you had like 6 teeth in your mouth, you were good enough for a draft. If you made like 100 pounds soaking wet, you were good enough for the draft. If you didn't have a significant disease that kept you from performing day in and day out, you were good enough for the draft. I mean, standards were freaking minimum compared to what they are today, because they needed bodies, right?
Right.
And she said, knowing what I've explained right to just now with protein levels. And again, let me grab my app real quick, because it is important to kind of give you an idea. But every day my goal for protein is 120 grams. And again, I'm 180 pounds. Okay. What would you guess? And if I remember correctly, the rough average of an American soldier was 140 to 145 pounds in the 1940s for World War II. What would you guess the protein level was for their intake every day, assuming they had all 3 squares a day and they're taken care of?
I think I see where this is headed, and I'm guessing what they were provided is probably half of what they needed to a third of what they needed.
No. So again, my goal is 120 grams of protein.
Yeah.
These guys, 250.
What?
Yeah, assuming this nutrition is correct. Again, that's where I'm starting here. But her point was, we see them as robust and just physical, right? And she's not saying it's great protein, but it was protein. They were burning also calories, because they're
they're training hard and they're working hard and they're fighting hard.
But she said 250 grams of protein, and she said, here's what's interesting about that. They built muscle quickly, obviously. That makes sense. And she said, here's one of the more interesting things about that fact. Their regeneration of cells and the recovery when they were wounded was astronomically faster. And that's crazy. Yeah. And to me, if you think about it, you go, well, protein helps you grow.
Build.
It helps you get growth, get bigger. And like you said, build. That makes sense. And that's potentially why people take so long to recover now, even with modern science. It's because we, over time, over the last 70 years, have decided that we need to cut out protein. And that's where, leading back to what we were already talking about with plant-based proteins, where the danger is in health. Right. If we don't continue down that line of promoting protein intake, we could potentially hurt ourselves physically if we don't take in the protein that we should every day.
Okay, now that brings several questions up. Did they know what they were doing with those protein levels?
Probably not, because keep in mind, nutrition back then was still its,
Infancy.
fundamentals. Yeah.
Yeah. So, and which again, I think back at guys that, you know, their past experience, they went into the Marine Corps, for instance, or the Army,
Mhm.
whatever, and they
Mhm.
go to boot camp and they weigh 135 pounds coming out of high school. They go to boot camp, and all of a sudden these dudes are bulked up
Mhm.
and they are cut
Even
in
though
how
they're
many
working
weeks?
probably twice or triple what they used to.
Right. Oh, by far. And they're doing exercises. I mean, this is, we're talking 1960s, 1970s,
Yeah.
even the early 80s when this was happening. And these guys were like, holy cow, they had muscles. They had no idea that what they looked like coming out of boot camp, but they could feel it. And they said the food had to been part of it. It wasn't just the exercise, because if you can exercise and not have protein, you're going to break muscle down. It's not going to have a chance to rebuild. So completely makes sense. But I that's why I asked, I was exactly the wrong way. I thought, well, the state of what the world was at the time, that maybe they weren't getting the nutrition they had, because when they were eating K-rats, I mean, how good can that be?
But look at, historically speaking, look at how much of the United States, the home front, suffered because of that. Look
Oh
at how
yeah,
much of the food was, hey, we're going to ration at home because our boys up front need it.
need it, right.
It starts
Well,
to
and
make a little more sense too.
they weren't just rationing food, they were rationing everything. Um,
Fuel, tin, chocolate, coffee.
paper,
I'm
paper.
Yeah, they were rationing
My
everything.
my grandmother, my great grandmother, my dad's mother. So my maternal great grandmother or paternal great grandmother, I saw her making a grocery list one time when I was in junior high school. She was writing from the bottom of the piece of paper, writing it up, and it was on a small, kind of a what you would call a list type sticky, and it was just bound at the top, but it was thin. It was a grocery list for that purpose, and she's writing from the bottom up. And I said, Grandma, why do you start at the bottom of the page and write up? Everybody starts at the top. And she goes, no. And I got a quick lesson in rationing of commodities during the war.
Because you go
And
up and then
that's
you
what she
rip
was.
at the top,
You
and
rip
you
it
can
you
go up
rip it off,
further.
and then you can continue to use it. You don't waste any paper.
Yeah. Yeah. It makes
Yeah.
sense.
And it still gives you part of a tablet that it's in its whole state to you know for a better word. And oh, they used to get limited coffee, and they would
Yep.
grind wheat in it,
Yep.
be
You've
to
shared that
just to kind of
before on this
stretch it.
channel. That was
Okay,
something
yeah,
that kind of blew my mind.
yeah, and now these hipsters are drinking coffee with wheat in it because something they discovered.
Full circle for a whole nother reason.
Right, right, yeah. So Grandpa is like, he loved his coffee, and he's like, oh yeah, yeah. I remember when we had to ration this, and we had to pour wheat in there to grind it
Yeah.
with our beans. Literally, and they were grinding beans by hand.
Yeah.
They couldn't afford store-bought coffee. They just get what they could. But yeah, it was a eye opener for me at that age, and I was starting to become aware of the greater world when you're starting in junior high, out of elementary school, and you're learning things. But here you've got people that lived through that and
Right.
still had behaviors unconscious.
Mhm.
Probably by that time they'd done it so long because of that emotional need to be able to conserve everything they had. Well, look at every junk pile that most places have, and a lot of them were because they were Depression era and World War II era need to have, or I might need this to have
Right.
at
Right.
some point, and so on their own couldn't get it, or then in the war was with rationing. So kind of got down a little squirrel hole there, but that's interesting with the nutrition. Did she talk about carbs
No, unfortunately, I
later
mean,
on?
it's a TikTok, so you're
Yeah.
limited on time.
Okay.
But yeah, I just thought it was
That's
something
very
interesting.
interesting. Yeah.
Yeah.
That's
Um.
well, I think we don't eat enough protein as it is. Well,
Yeah.
I think we do, but that's
Well, and it has made me think since that. It has made me think of how much steak I grew up eating, just how much meat in general, I should
meat.
say, how much
Yeah.
I grew up eating, and the difference in growth I had versus others my age. There's body differences
Right.
always, but the ability I was able to get bigger physically in terms of muscle and then strength as well, because despite my size, people underestimate my strength. And I think a lot of that has to do with my protein consumption growing up. And to this
Well,
day,
and
I still have a lot of protein. I do intake a lot of protein compared to a lot of other people, but I think there's something to that. I really do. And especially, working on the ranch and stuff like that. I think there's a lot of combination there that constant physical activity, not eating the wrong stuff, but eating a lot of meat as well. I think there's a lot of combination there. As I've thought of it over and over, I think there's a lot there that it makes sense as to why I
yeah.
have turned out the way I have. But
Well, that is interesting because yeah, you guys were very very active growing up. We had you working. You're multi athlete or sport athletes,
yeah.
but we consumed a lot of venison, a lot of
Hmm.
beef, a lot of
Hmm.
chicken,
Hmm.
some fish. That's basically, but it was almost every meal you had those,
Right.
and a lot of
Well,
egg, a lot of protein that way.
it's
Which
interesting too, because I've told people too, wrestling, you have to be very conscious of your weight.
right,
For 4 years, I wrestled, competitively in high school, where you had to pay attention to your weight. I wrestled in junior high a little bit, where you weren't nearly as cognizant of your weight. It's just kind of, hey, whatever you are, we'll make it work.
right,
High school, there are definitive weights, and because the way the body digests meat, we had a certain intake. That mom and you were very supportive of how we ate, what days we ate. The red meat, beef and pork. Well, it was mostly beef was Monday, Tuesday. Pork, we would do like pork or chicken would be Tuesday through Thursday or Tuesday, Wednesday. And then Thursday, Friday potentially would be like a fish or something very light, because just,
mm,
again, just the way the body processes those types of meat.
right,
And then we would have our tournaments Friday, Saturday, sometimes Sunday. Those That's how we kind of laid out the week. And I didn't know that until mom told me later, because she had talked to our coach, who was
right,
he's very understanding of nutrition, and he helped me understand a little bit better growing up. So it made more sense as to how I could watch what I ate so I could prepare for the week. But those heavier meats towards the beginning of the week, let your body digest it, and it ends up with lighter meats. And it was interesting. We were still able to get our protein. We're still able to get the fuels that our bodies required and needed, but we timed it so that our bodies could process things, so there wasn't so much stuff in our gut when it came time to weigh in, because whatever's in your gut is still what's going to be in your weight.
right,
So it's kind of
right.
that stuff.
Well, and yeah, I didn't mention pork, but I mean, we eat a fair amount of pork, but it's mainly beef and venison. Chicken
Right.
are the big three
Right.
probably, but there's another source that I get, and I'm a big proponent on eating a big breakfast.
Hmm.
If I can have a big breakfast, I can go all day. Yeah, I might be hungry, but I won't stop. I'll just keep going. It drives your mom crazy because I eat like a coyote. I will tank up, and then it's got to last me, because that's why I do tank up in the morning, and then probably eat too much at night. But I always have meat, and I try to do heavy carbs like hash browns, diced potatoes, something like that for
Pancakes.
breakfast. Pancakes, those carbs, and those don't stick with me like the hot or like the
No.
hash browns do. But
Yeah.
um, and then you top that off with eggs. And your mom is always like, doesn't need meat, or she doesn't eat, she'll eat a little bit of meat, but doesn't necessarily eat an egg. It's kind of rare. And she goes, I already get my protein with my eggs. And I go, no, eggs aren't protein. Eggs are eggs. They just go along with this stuff.
Yeah.
But eggs they're also a good source of protein. They're
Yeah.
not
Well,
they're not the evil thing that was they were made out to be when I was a kid. Because if somebody had high cholesterol, oh my God, they couldn't even look at an egg. They die.
right. Well, and that's the nice thing about eggs too, is because of the fats in the eggs. I think the fats and the proteins, they're able to make you last a little bit longer
Yeah.
as
Yeah.
well. But the last thing that I wanted to cover was influence. There was one of the last things I put on here. I talked about us being kind of an influencer, uh, the other influences being the government, organizations such as representatives, any charitable do-gooders is what I said, and then anybody who may or not have a social media presence, but they're still a rancher or a farmer, and they talk to people who are on the outside, so to speak. What do you think? Your thoughts on influencers, people who are able to kind of sway those who are uneducated or naive to what's going on, and to explain the process, such as meat. I had a conversation with somebody who'd never met a rancher before a couple days ago, explained how, we're looking at $1.40 if we're lucky for a pound of meat, and you're buying a steak for at least $15 in the
Not even a
store.
great cut. Yeah.
Right, and the difference between those 2 and why it gets that way. So what are some of those influencers and ways that we can try and inform people, whether intentionally or unintentionally, so that everybody understands what the process is, what's going on, and why things are the way they are currently?
Yeah, that's a really good question because um, just talking to people, and I think people have to have a natural curiosity about them.
Yeah, naturally. I think I agree with that, because if you're not interested, you have no tie to actually want to learn about it.
Right, you're not going to care.
Yeah.
You know, if that's not part of what is driving you for some reason, for instance, like bodybuilders, they're most of them are they're watching their intake, like you mentioned, and some of them are watching it so much they don't want any hormone influence. They want now natural. I mean, they want just grass fed, or you name it, to reduce the fat intake and just get the most lean meat they can get. So that's a natural curiosity or a natural need they have. If you have someone who, and there are people that honestly they just don't like the taste of meat.
Right.
Okay, that's
I
fine.
understand.
Or maybe they have a religious issue there or whatever. Um, they have no idea and don't care and don't need to know. But at some point, that doesn't just carry on to the protein, the meat part of that. That could carry on to something else and the production of that. And so, are they curious about the green stuff they're sticking in their mouth? I would bet they probably are. Like most of us are, you're like, okay, is this good for me or not? I think we've had a lot of education about that from the time I was in grade school. The
Hmm.
old food pyramid thing.
Right.
So when when you have anybody that is involved with something like that at some point, that's one commonality we all have. We all got to eat. And so that brings that to a point where when you're having a conversation with somebody, you should be able to talk about it. And hopefully they're curious, they're not. You can't force somebody to listen to you. You shouldn't. I'd be the same way. If somebody's gonna talk to me about, you know, I don't know, Broadway musicals or something, it's like, okay, is that the ones where they sing? You know, or are they just playing music? I mean, I've got really no interest in it, but if somebody's going to tell me about it, I might pick something up out of that. I don't know.
Right.
I try to be somewhat curious, even if it's just out of being polite. You might spur a question, and when that does, then we just need to keep talking. Um, some don't have a social. I wouldn't have a social media if it wasn't for you and your mother. Because your brother really doesn't have a social media.
Let's be honest.
You
You
know,
don't have social media. You just ride mom's coattails, but that's
Oh
fine.
yeah, no, no, no. I look at that, but well, I do have one social media. That's not true, but it's not about anything where I'm curious about making friends with somebody. It's about just being some awareness of and getting to know me. If anybody wants to do that for God knows whatever reason, uh, but as far as jumping on the social media bandwagon, no, not for that purpose. I see it as a tool, and that's what we try to use it for, as a outlet. And some others, some of the technology can be pretty overwhelming to some of us that are a little bit older and wiser, we think, or have some experience. And those are the people you need to draw on. I mean, my God, I wish I could have conversations with people that are, 40 years older than me that are, they're gone now, and I can't anymore. And I wish I could. There's so many things that you don't really know what you don't know. And
Hmm.
until you start talking to somebody, you're not going to know, and you're not going to enhance the way you view things, or maybe change the way you view things from our standpoint as well.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you just got to keep talking and keep meeting people. And, you know, get past some of the hickness ridicule that we do seem to at times draw to ourselves when we're in those urban areas. But you know, uh, you just got to keep talking and hopefully not turn people off
Yeah.
with, what we're doing. Anyway,
And I would say as we close this up, that's the one thing I do try is based off my current circumstances, who I work with and where I live. When people do find out I'm from Montana, my family, has a small ranch, this is what we do. I try to go out of my way to use that as a educational experience if they are inclined. If they're not, don't worry about it. I
yeah,
don't engage. It's fine. But
yeah,
I do try to go out of my way when that happens to say, hey, these are some of the things to understand, because one of the first things they hear is, oh, you guys breed cattle and you raise them. Yep. For beef, I'm like, yep. I'm like, man, those beef prices are pretty expensive. Like, okay, this is a good opportunity to talk about
there
that.
you go. You guys
Let's
must
have
be rich.
yeah, I was like, let's have a discussion about that. Or things like, oh, is it just like, you guys living on Yellowstone, the show? I'm like,
Right.
nope, that's not it at all. Let's have a discussion about it. That's how you get those ties in there. But I think being able to influence people personally is the best because you
Yeah.
can get a individual connection with them. But social media is the next best platform, things like YouTube. But it's just little
Well,
by little.
and trying to do it in a positive manner because quite honestly, people in agriculture feel like they're under attack because every
Every
time you turn
damn
around,
day.
yeah, it's like you are fighting a battle and you get tired and you get weary and you get short tempered and like nobody cares, nobody listens. And
Yep.
so, uh, there's frustration there and there's frustration across the board on many different levels, depending on what you're doing, the varied and wide variety of things that we do when in agriculture. Um, we don't raise soybeans, we don't raise carrots, but you know what? There's frustration and the same issues going on with those folks as well. So, you try to be as positive as you can and get people to understand why we're doing what we're doing. And I guess we probably, for our subscribers, maybe they're a little bit frustrated too, because every time when we end this, I say, we thank you till you're better paid. They never get paid. That thank you's all you get.